Beyond belief, beyond doctrine, a deeper conversation. Exploring spirituality with Vusumzi Ngxande on the Clement Manyathela Show.
The Clement Manyathela Show
On 702.
So we started this feature last month, if you've just joined us and you didn't know about it, and we call it Exploring Spirituality with Vusumzi Ngxande. Vusumzi is the author of Journey Kwantu. It's a book that I keep talking about everywhere I go. It's an incredible book because Vusumzi has spent years researching African spirituality, identity, and often this complex relationship between culture, religion, and personal belief. And I have read that book. It's so insightful. So I would recommend it highly. Journey Kwantu, Exploring African Spirituality and Identity. That's the title of the book. So last month, we started this feature by having a conversation about religion in a changing world. And in that conversation, we unpacked spirituality in a modern, fast-changing world and how many people are trying to reconcile their belief systems, identity, their lived experience. And there was so much to explore last month. We were inundated with your calls, with your WhatsApps as well. We didn't have enough time to get through even half of your calls and WhatsApps. So what we decided to do last month with Vusumzi was that instead of us getting and moving to a new topic today, we're actually going to do part 2 of that discussion about religion in a changing world. And I'd like you to join this conversation. This is all about exploring. It's an explorative journey. No one really has fully the answers. We're trying to explore this with each other. So please feel free to join the conversation on 011-883-0702. I'd like to know how you are navigating spirituality, right, in this changing world. Have you ever felt torn between your religion and your cultural beliefs? Where do you find yourself at in this moment? 011-883-0702. You can send your WhatsApps on 0727021702. Vusumzi, welcome back to the show, brother.
Thank you so much,
good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, man.
How's
So,
Cape Town?
Cape Town is good. The weather is really great.
Nice.
Bafana was playing Panama last night. It was chock-a-block, but
Yeah.
it was so exhilarating.
No. Exciting stuff, eh?
So I can't, you know how many people have contacted me asking me to send them the podcast
Yes.
of our conversation the last time.
Yes.
I have lost count. And these are people that, many of them are not even people that I know as regular listeners of my show. I had someone from home in Mpumalanga who said, hey, a friend of mine told me you had a conversation that was so powerful about spirituality with a guy called Vusumzi. And I said, and asked me to send the podcast. So I'm really happy to see that
That is
people
such great
are
amazing,
enjoying
man.
the conversation, right? And because that's what we're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to get people to actually ask the uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
Because many of them can't ask them in their churches.
Yes.
They can't ask them with their spiritual leaders. They can't ask them with the Sangoma that they consult with. And we want to create that platform for that. Let's just recap a little bit first, Vusumzi.
Yeah.
Last time when we spoke about religion in this changing world, you actually told us about how Africa is now becoming, especially Southern Africa, is becoming that center point
Yes.
for religion and,
Yes.
is it Catholicism or whatever you describe it?
Anglicanism, yes.
Anglicanism. Can you explain that again for those that may have missed it?
I don't know how many people, especially in the Anglican Church, are aware that on the 7th, actually, of last month, the Anglican Church officially split into two, between the European Church and the African Church, or rather what they call the Global South, right? And what that means is that the majority now of Anglican believers now reside in the Global South. And this is now across the board with most of religious institutions, most churches now. The largest body of believers within any Christian faith now reside in the Global South. And what that means is that purely based on numbers alone, Africans, predominantly Africans, are now in charge of the Christian faith. Now, from this point onwards, the character, the nature, the principle of Christianity is going to be decided by Africans. Because if you look at what's happening around the world, the chaos that's happening around the world, the West as the moral authority, especially when it comes to religion, has been lost. And in that there isn't much that the West can offer the rest of the world spiritually and religiously, with all the chaos. So what that means now is that with Christianity and religion in general, and as well as spirituality, the question is, what are Africans going to do with the power that they have now been granted? Because the technical thing about it is that this change, this shift, is not necessarily on merit. This is a change because we live in a human society. Human societies are governed by change, and they're governed by cycles. And now the cycle of spirituality and religion has cycled from the West to the global South. And what we have to consider is that historically, especially when it comes to Christianity, when you speak about the relationship of Africans and religion and Christianity, is that there is a harsh history behind it. When we encountered Christianity, it came in the form of colonialism. It came in the form of oppression, dispossession, and all of those ills. So now the question is, now that it is in our control, what is the character of spirituality going to be? What does it now represent? And I have to go back to the what the split in the Anglican Church symbolizes, because the split happens fundamentally over something very basic, or rather a one issue, and that is that the global South, the leaders of the global South, believe that in the Anglican Church in Europe, inaugurating a woman as a bishop goes against the principles of the faith itself. That's number one. And number two, it is that they do not believe in how the Western Church is basically creating a space for the presence of the LGBTQ plus community. They believe that that community does not have a place within the church, right? So that is one thing. That is a highlight as to what are the ways in which the African body of Christ is going to shape religion and Christianity going forward. But that's just one church. It is not to say that that is what's happening across the board, But the reality of the situation is that ultimately Africans are now officially and unofficially in charge of the Christian faith. And now, what are they going to do about it?
Yeah. One of the things lately that you hear a lot, especially from also from the younger, let me not say especially, because I wouldn't know how to quantify it, but a lot of people, when you ask them about, whether they go to church or they are religious, you often hear this phrase, I am not religious, I'm spiritual. I am getting to a point of seeking a relationship with God directly, as opposed to through my pastor, through my religious leader. What does that tell us about where we find ourselves now? Do you get a sense that there's a yearning to experience God and this superpower directly? And is it because of people who feel failed by the spiritual leaders and the churches, or is it just a yearning of, I want to have a direct relationship with whoever or whatever the source is?
Yeah. When you started, we said that we deal with very difficult questions. And what you're starting with now, what you're bringing us to, is one of the most difficult questions to ask within the spiritual and religious space. And that is the question of what happens when a person loses their faith, right? Which is now the reality of many people, right? Losing faith in your beliefs. This is across the board. You have people who were Christians who no longer feel connected to Christianity. You have people who went through Intwaso and were deep within the African spiritual belief system, and now they're feeling like it does not resonate with them. And I think this is, in this session, I would like to speak on that, a lot. I want us to speak to people who have lost their faith. I want us to be in conversation with those people. But this topic, when it comes up, when you speak about the concept of the reality of people losing their faith and losing or disconnecting with their beliefs, a lot of the time the people who respond are going to be people who want to give advice on what to do when that happens, or people who want to say, no, if this has happened, this is how you go back. But I want us to take time to embrace those people who are still in that phase whereby they are saying, I grew up in this particular faith, but I feel disconnected from it, or there's this particular direction that I went into as of my own accord, but now it's finding me in a way where I feel like this is actually not me anymore. And one of the things I want to touch on is the reality of trauma and religion. We generally really underestimate the realities of what trauma does to people. And here's the thing. With a lot of people, trauma creates very deep bonds when it comes to religion, And part of it is because there's something that happens between human beings when we suffer together. There's something that makes us feel deeply connected to something when we suffer together. Sometimes even more than winning together. When we suffer together, when we win together, it means something even more, as you're talking about, very evident in soccer, when we are there in the stadium, we're suffering together. When we win, you feel there's an affinity towards other people. So now there's a sense of, with spirituality and religion, there's this concept of, sofa sonke, we are in this together, So when you start losing now your faith, because trauma can lead you deeper into your faith and trauma can also lead you out of it. When you start losing your faith, the danger that we all know subconsciously in our psyche is that you are putting yourself in a situation where you are going to suffer alone. Suffering alone is not necessarily something that people are averse to. The issue with suffering alone is that religion gives us meaning for suffering. Religion will say you are suffering because of this reason. You're suffering because God is molding you, and God is creating, is working on your character. Or you would say, within African spirituality, they would say, it is leading you to a better version of yourself. That is what's happening. Now, outside of that framework, suffering seems like it's suffering for its own sake, and this is a thing that can cause deep level of fear in people to say, like, I can't go outside because whatever is going to happen to me outside has no reason. And for me, the idea of that kind of annihilation of character of my being, that all of those things are going to be happening and I won't have some kind of a justification, is part of what leads people to struggle with exploring, or rather thinking outside of their own belief system.
Okay, but then I'm just trying to think now that there are people who are, of course, they like the idea of, okay, there can be justification and explanations to the suffering, but I do find that sometimes those explanations and justifications still don't land. And I think I used this example the last time when we spoke, that what do you say to a mother who loses a 2-month-old child or 2-year-old child from cancer, and this mother has prayed and begged God, and the pastor or even the sangoma who was helping the mom said, let's keep on praying and asking the ancestors to help. Let's keep on praying and asking God to help. The help is on the way.
Yes,
Some pastors would preach and say, don't worry, help is your child is healed in the name of Jesus. Your child dies.
Yes.
And now suddenly the pastors move from that confidence of, I declare, because you've declared it. You've said to this woman, your child is going to live, but the child dies.
Yes.
Or someone who's prayed for their mom to be healed, but the mom dies. And then it changes then to, oh no, but it is the will of God, or God is trying to prune you, to strengthen you. How do we rationalize that? And I think I raised it in our last conversation, that I think maybe the mistake we make is to think God is an emotional God like that can just be appealed to when I fast for 3 days because I need a job. And if I fast for 3 days, then I'm going to get a random call suddenly asking me to come for an interview. Is that how we rationalize with the God, or do we actually love the protection that comes with, at least I can explain, even when I fail an exam, even when my mom passes away, even when my child dies, there's an explanation I have that helps me hold on to the faith.
You know, this is making me think of the principles of African spirituality in the way it was formulated in ancient times, is that within African spirituality, there is nothing to fall out of, if you get what I mean. Because within African spirituality, we are of nature, we are within nature, we are of God, we are within God. So there's nothing that comes out that you will be falling out of. You can't lose faith necessarily in nature, because nature is something that is all encompassing. So now what you're raising is the reality that Western religion has created an entity separate from us. It has created this belief system that we go into and we can come out of, right? And now I want to speak particularly about, the mother who has lost her child, because what religion will say is that if you are at that woman and you start questioning God, you are doing something wrong. You know what I mean? And for me, those are the people that I believe in this particular moment need to be attended to say, what happens when someone goes through trauma? As I said, it's trauma that can lead you into faith. And there's also trauma that can lead you out of it, because, there's different kinds of trauma. There is death trauma, like the shock, the sudden something that happens, accidents and all of those things, like you lose a child, you lose a partner, you lose a parent and all of those things, or you lose your job or your capacity to work. That is the one thing. And then there's also a more prolonged kind of trauma that happens over time, over decades, something that sort of hollows you out. There are things that happen, and I can say that's something that happened to me in the church, something that happens over time, and it just keeps hollowing you out over time. And you get to the point where one day you wake up and you're like, what am I doing? You're sitting there in church and there is this, you're listening, you've been doing this for most of your life, and you're like, there's nothing here for me. What I want to emphasize is that moment is probably the most important moment in your spiritual journey, outside of everything that has happened up until that moment. In that, now, what is happening is that you are dismantling within yourself the mechanisms, the infrastructure of the man-made faith. Now you're confronting spirituality in and of itself. You are there by yourself and saying, why is it that I was supposed to lose a child? Because no one is going to answer that question for you, But now I want to also emphasize the importance of embracing that you're in. There's different mechanisms of moving away from your faith. I think in Christianity there's been a movement called deconstruction. It has been happening in the West, and a lot of young people have been going through that, which is basically where you systematically, through reading a lot of the time, ironically, through reading and research, you start putting pieces together, and you get to a point where you're like, this faith does not make logical sense anymore. And this faith is not what I thought it is. Yeah. And in many ways, people who find themselves in these situations where they are questioning, where they find themselves not connected, even within African spirituality. There are many people who, as I said before, who went through Intwaso and became healers, or people who went into the faith, into the belief system, and wanted to practice it consciously and intentionally. Yet they are finding that, nothing is getting better, because there's an irony in that African spirituality is always connected with socio-economic trauma. Idlozi is there seemingly to solve your socio-economic problems, where be it a job, be it this, be it a lot of the time is connected with socio-economic problems, predominantly outside of family things.
Yeah.
And now there's many people like that. Many of us went through the process where, like, now we're finding ourselves outside of our faith. We're finding ourselves outside of our belief system. It's like you are spiritually homeless. You are a spiritually homeless person. And you are in that moment where you feel like, what now? And that's possibly the most daunting thing about it, because it's easy to say, I don't believe in church anymore, I don't believe in this. But now the reality is that, okay, what happens in the wilderness, in that homelessness? And that is something that I believe that we now need to face and embrace.
And where do you run to when you are in the wilderness and there's trauma that comes or there's a shock that happens in your life? Do you have the capacity to handle it on your own? Because for the rest of your life, what you have been taught is here's a framework.
Yes.
Here's a framework. Either you have to go uyopahla and talk to abantu abadala and say, hey, this is what I need. Please help here. Or you go to church and you pray and you say to God, help me, I'm here. When you are outside of those institutions and the shock that happens,
Yes.
where do you go? And because the issue is for the last 36 years of your life, you've lived on a framework. But now you've left that framework, whether through African spirituality or through the church. Would you say that, and maybe this is what most people don't talk about, when you are in that so-called wilderness and spiritually homeless, that's the loneliness that tackles you.
Yes.
The inability to know where to move to because the frameworks you used to rely on for the rest of your life are completely out of the window now.
Yes. It's like you've been reading my mind. One of the biggest issues that you face when you are in the spiritual wilderness is the idea that religion and spirituality actually comprise more than just what God do you believe in. It's also the framework, because what happens when you leave your church, you leave your religion, you leave your faith, what happens there is that you also lose your spiritual support system. You lose your infrastructure. You lose, in some instances, you lose friends. You lose family. You lose people who were very close to you because now they can no longer relate to you, because to them, they only see you as a part of this thing. They don't recognize anything outside of that. But here's the irony of it. In just about every spiritual discipline, in every Christian faith, all religion, there's always a period of being in the wilderness. Be it, for Jesus Christ found himself in the wilderness. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam found himself in isolation when he was given instruction to write the Quran. For Moses within Jewish practice, there's always moments. Even if you look at Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama found himself in the spiritual wilderness before he became the Buddha. So I think
some people call it the dark night.
Yes, the dark night of the soul, precisely. And there is a thing in which, within all spiritual practices, somehow that period gets negated, and or that we get shamed into believing that period, is something that is wrong. Because when that person was going through that, even Christ himself, when he was going through that, it wasn't a rejection of something. It was that there are things that are happening that I'm trying to understand, and they're not fitting in with my understanding of the world. And there's now a necessary aspect whereby you need to consciously deconstruct your faith from every aspect of it, right up until to its very foundation, to say, what is it, this thing that I believe in, and why is it that I believe in it?
Yeah. It's 10:31.
Beyond belief, beyond doctrine, a deeper conversation. Exploring spirituality with Vusumzi Ngxande on the Clement Manyathela Show.
The Clement Manyathela Show.
On 702.
23 minutes before 11 o'clock. It's our monthly feature. We call this Exploring Spirituality with Vusumzi Ngxande, and it's all about doing exactly that. Exploring spirituality. A lot of people have felt like they're losing faith. There are many people that are also going back to their faith. There are many questions that people ask themselves in this changing world. And most of those questions are about spirituality, and we want to create a platform for you to question with us, right? We want to create a platform for you to ask your uncomfortable questions that you wouldn't necessarily ask in front of your spiritual leader, in front of your family that has brought you into their spiritual beliefs. We want that platform to be able to ask those questions. So that's why we've created this platform. Let's start with your WhatsApps that are coming through on 072 702 1702.
Morning, Clement. Good topic. Clement, I think people must stop being misled by these pastors and these false prophets. They're giving people false hope. God cannot be blamed. The Bible says that God pleases as He does. You understand? So there's a time to love and there's a time to die. If it is the will of God that that child must love, that child will love. If it's not in the will of God for that child to love, that child will die. So that's my opinion. Yeah, but God is never to be blamed for anything. We must just bear that in mind. Thanks, Clement.
Well, thank you very much for your WhatsApp voice note. There's another one that's come through, but before I get to it, let me read this message from, is it Chicks on the WhatsApp line, who says, Clement, I listened to a recent podcast episode and they spoke about how the most successful countries are the least religious, and us mostly here in Africa and poor countries have become the most religious. And I wonder if this speaks to Africa taking over Christianity because we are in dire straits that we need and we need God's intervention so much. I think that's what you're trying to say there. Chicks, thank you so much for your WhatsApp. In fact, we touched on this with Vusumzi in the last episode about how much of this increase in people going back to their religion on the southern part of this continent and broadly on this continent, how much of that has to do with, of course, the need that exists. Let's go to some more WhatsApps. 072-702-1702.
Hi, Clement. Absolutely love this topic, so thank you so much to you and your guest. From my side, personally, Sikhule Ngxande who honor amadlozi and Wachinja nje. Sababazalwane, which came with a lot of conflict, a lot of separation, a lot of division within the family, which is tough. And a lot of practices that we practiced previously in terms of slander, etc. That all stopped. There's a lot of things that stopped. For example, a lot, and it's caused a lot of problems in our family and division, because you cannot be this, you cannot honor, you cannot be mzalwana, you have to be one thing or another. You can't be both.
Yo, that's a complex one, hey, Vusumzi, and I know in the book you touch a bit about it. Many people feel like they have to choose between Christianity or, their religion, whatever it is, and ancestral belief. And I wonder is that a false choice? Like, can these belief systems genuinely coexist, or are there fundamental contradictions? Or does it depend on you as an individual, how you relate with them?
The question itself is the premise of the question. The context of the question comes from the Western construct of religion, of either or, in group dynamics, in that within our own beliefs, we wouldn't have a thing where do you believe in this or that. Across many cultures, non-Western cultures, there's a plurality in how people practice their beliefs, and there's very rarely a thing that if you don't practice this, then there's going to be like eternal damnation for you. So the question is relevant and it is extremely important, but also we have to understand where the question is coming from. Within an African perspective, there isn't a question of do you choose between this or that? For example, you can have idlozi, which were people who lived before you, who are spirit beings, who can help you to navigate Christianity itself, because you might find that you have an elder who passed away. I was recently I was interviewing a lady who is a founder of a church, who is also a healer, and that church was given to her by her deceased grandfather. She was basically doing the work that he gave her, who was in every way a pastor, a preacher, someone who was deeply involved within the church. And after he passed, he said, you are now going to be the custodian of this church. So the question of, do we choose between that or that, is actually not our question. It's a question that is given to us. So it's not about whether you can do both, because both are in some ways the same thing. But within the Christian faith, there are very clear lines that are drawn. Very recently, there's a pastor who was basically put on leave because he's also a healer at the same time. You have then the Methodist Church, who are actually taking strides. A couple of years ago, they held a seminar where they were speaking to people who are healers within the Methodist Church to say, what are the realities? Even though the church cannot make pronouncements as to whether or not what role you can play, the Methodist Church has embraced that reality that it exists within an African society. And within the African society, you have these particular realities for people.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So how do you then explain, Vusumzi, a situation where someone doesn't necessarily, maybe they believe in Islam or Christianity, and then there's someone who comes to them who is a traditional healer who says, you need to go and you've got a calling, or your dad is unhappy about certain things. And when you look back, this dad has never even taken care of you.
Yeah.
You don't even know.
Oh, yes, I remember
your
that
dad.
story.
Right? You speak about this also in the book. But what do you say to that? Because there are people who will say, but I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
So why would someone then come to me and say, hey, you need to use your father's surname?
Yeah.
And that time your father has never even bought you a pair of jeans or underwear. But for some reason, in his deceased state and environment, wherever they are,
now he's a president.
They want you to buy expensive alcohol and take their surname. Like, how do you rationalize that?
Here's the irony of it. Let's take religion and spirituality, put it aside. Let's say you're an atheist, you believe in nothing, right? You don't believe in spirituality, you don't believe in God. You can grow up in a particular home relatively fine. You can go to school relatively okay. You can finish school, start a career, and be relatively fine. You can find love and be relatively happy in your marriage and have kids and be relatively fine without ever believing in anything, And whenever bad things happen to you, you are going to say it's because life happens, The realities of how relevant is it when a person comes to you and says, you have to do this because your grandfather did this and this. For example, you are not going to go to a white person and say that to them, right? You're not going to go to this other person and say, no, your grandfather does this. There's particular context to it. And it also depends on what you believe in, what your actual belief is. And I want to raise something that I believe is the fundamental foundation of belief and faith, because there's something that is very subtle in spirituality and religion that is extremely subtle, but it is extremely powerful in how it plays out in our lives, and that is the question of resonance. What resonates with you, right? The question of resonance is something either feels right or sounds right. So I'll give you an example. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, I think it's Talking to Strangers. There's an experiment that was done in America where it was a speed dating experiment where they got a group of people together to do speed dating. And what they did was they made the people write down your list of requirements in a partner, to say, what would you like to have in an ideal partner? And the people wrote it down. And they did this experiment a couple of times with different groups of people. And what they found consistently was that most of the time, people ended up connecting with people who didn't meet their requirements. Right? A lot of the people ended up dating people who did not actually meet what was stipulated in their tick boxes. And that's the question of resonance. There are things that sound right to you, and there are things that feel right. There was an earlier caller who was speaking about what the Bible says. And here's the reality that sometimes people who are Christian kind of don't understand. You can quote to me a scripture 1,000,000 times and nothing happens. You can quote that scripture to one other person and it leads to some kind of revelation. And this is the question of resonance. What resonates with you? And the issue about resonance is that it's built up into things that sometimes we actually don't have control over, right? And this is the thing. You don't choose who you like. You don't choose your type. You just resonate with your type. This is the thing. If we were to put it within relationship terms, you don't. You didn't decide what your type should be. Like, no, I prefer this. You can say I prefer this kind of a person with this particular build. You didn't decide for that to be something that you want in a person. That is a thing that resonated with you. And this is now something that people who are deeply religious sometimes struggle to understand, is that sometimes you are in a particular faith because it resonates with you. Even in its darkest moments, even in its most challenging parts, it still resonates with you. And for me, the concept of resonance, I want to say, almost dismantles the concept that we all need to be within a particular belief system. There are people who would be better if we could choose of our own accord. Let's say all the religions were laid out in front of you. Certain people would only resonate with certain belief systems. To take it back to the idea of relationships, if you were to give me, let's say, your list of requirements in a woman, in a partner, and you say, I want this and this and this and this and this, I can bring 10 of them. All of them meet those requirements, and you're not going to fall in love with a single one of them, not one of them. You are going to go in, you're going to see what you're going to say and encounter, and you're going to walk out and you're going to say, she's not here. Why? Because there's resonance. Yes.
Yeah.
So I need people. It's important for us to understand that when you are in that spiritual wilderness, the thing that has faded is resonance with particular things. It's not to say the belief that you're in is necessarily wrong. It just stopped feeling wrong to you. It might still sound right. It might still sound right that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior. It sounds right, but it doesn't feel right. And for me, for those people who are finding themselves in the spiritual wilderness, that's something that I would need them to be cognizant of, is that what has also happened in that space is that it is your resonance that has decreased, your resonance within a particular space, within a particular belief system. And the resonance of it is not the cancelling of that particular practice.
It's not the cancellation of that practice. All right, 9 minutes before 11 o'clock.
Beyond belief, beyond doctrine, a deeper conversation. Exploring spirituality with Vusumzi Ngxande on the Clement Manyathela Show.
The Clement Manyathela Show.
On 702.
It's 6 minutes before 11 o'clock. Let's go to your WhatsApps on 072 702 and 702.
Hi, Clement, and to your guest. Shiva's here in Boksburg. I just wanted to know, what is the definition of faith? Because what I think it is it means following blindly, without any knowledge, without any certainty. For example, if one jumps off a building, they'll jump off knowing that they're going to survive no matter what, as opposed to hoping they will survive. So maybe let's start by trying to define what faith is. Actually. Thanks.
Hi, Clement. I've got a question. What's the point of praying then? Because we always get, if it's the will of God, it will not happen or it will happen, right? So it sounds like the decision has been made, it's predetermined, it'll happen or not. So what's the point of praying then, or fasting, asking, if it's already been decided? Thanks.
We have these particular
Good morning, Clement Alvin. Mina Clement, I just chose not to complicate things. I'm living a very simple and balanced life. You know, you ask me to come with you to church or to go with you to church. I do. I go to church. You go, you have your Sangoma event, whatever. Whatever you ask me to do, I do it. I mean, I'm living a balanced life. I don't have a specific commitment to any practice. For me, I'm very flexible. Whatever that you want me to do, I don't have anything that I do it myself. But you know, when I join people, if you ask me to go to church, I go to church. You ask me to go to whatever, I do.
Oh, thank you so much for your WhatsApp. Vusumzi, there was that question about faith, and then the question about what's the point of praying if then you're also going to be told, but it's the will of God. So then it's already decided. So, Mthandazelani.
Sure. To deal with the first one, the issue of definition of faith, it's one of those things where it doesn't matter how it is explained to you. It will either make sense to you or it doesn't make sense to you. In and of itself, faith is something that exists within us. It is not an abstract. It is not like something that lives intellectually. As human beings, we believe in something. When we go to school, with a particular belief that if I go to school, this and this is going to happen. If I go to work, this and this is going to happen. Here's the irony of faith in the world that we live in. It is that the whole entire global economic system is built on faith, right? There's this concept that for example, underpinning much of the global economy, and that is gold. The value of gold is something that we have faith in. We can choose tomorrow that gold actually doesn't have much value. Because if you were to look at the uses of gold compared to whatever, platinum and all of those things, gold doesn't have as many uses as we think. But throughout human history, for tens of thousands of years, we've decided that this thing has a particular value based on its rarity. We said if something is rare, it's something that is valuable. That is faith. You know, you have faith in the fact that there is money somewhere of yours sitting in an account somewhere. That money exists as code on a system, on software. That is faith. Our whole human system functions on believing in things that we're convincing ourselves have faith. So we can't say that, or rather, faith is the inherent belief in human psyche that this is how the world functions. And that is what gives it form. You know, so there is no, when we look at it in religious terms, it tends to be become more fluid, as if you can either choose to be faithful or not to be faithful. But our world is literally built on faith.
On faith. And the second question about the point of praying?
The point of praying, it's up to you. And this is now, what I'm sharing is my personal view. It's not based on any particular thing. You're praying in order to connect with the thing that you are asking of God. There is nothing that God does not know. And there's nothing that God is not aware of. What tends to happen is that we tend to be misaligned with the things that we desire, and through faith, or rather through prayer and through fasting, all those actions are basically intentioned on aligning ourselves with those things. But the reality of the situation is that because we don't have a broader picture as to if I pray I want to become a radio presenter, I want to do that. But what if that means Clement must lose his job in order for me to become we are not aware of, the domino effects of the things that we're asking for. And that if you get this thing that you're actually asking for, this is the other consequences, or these are the other repercussions of the thing that you're asking for. Therefore, it doesn't happen. And then you are going to say that, my prayers were not answered.
Yeah. Vusumzi Ngxande, thank you so much. I can't wait for our next chat next month. Thank you for making
Thank you so much, sir.